With the first pick in the 1996 NBA Draft, the Philadelphia 76ers select
Darius Acuff Jr. from the University of Arkansas.
Allen Iverson is remembered as one of the most crafty guards the game has ever seen. But today we are stepping into an alternate reality to see what happens when Darius Acuff Jr. takes AI's place in NBA history. And while eventually he'll go from team to team just like AI, he would be starting off his career as a 76er, where he would put the league on notice after dropping a 40 ball on Jordan's head in Chicago. This display of elite scoring led him to average 22 points and 7 assists per game, separating himself from the competition and eventually ending the season as the unanimous Rookie of the Year. But after a remarkable season personally, the Sixers wouldn't even grasp playoff hopes, giving Acuff something to look forward to as he heads into his second year, where he would show off his scoring ability even more, increasing his average points to 25 a game, as well as appearing in his first All-Star game. He's already proven he belongs in the league, but the challenge is turning individual greatness into actual winning basketball. Because while he'd helped the Sixers to 43 wins and a playoff berth, they would be swept in the first round by the Pacers, who will be one of the biggest roadblocks on Acuff's path to a championship. So while he wouldn't find team success, Acuff would average 29 points in his first ever playoff series, bringing a lot of encouragement as he enters Season 3.
Even as the NBA plays its most important games of the season, negotiations are ongoing between the league and the Players Association for a new collective bargaining agreement. The current contract expires June 30th, and if a new agreement is not in place by then, a lockout or possibly a moratorium on league business could begin.
With the lockout in place, the NBA would take an extended offseason, resulting in players becoming out of shape and unprepared for the following season. But not Acuff. He took advantage, staying in the gym for hours, working on his craft, and waiting for his opportunity to take the league by storm. But in order to do so, he'll have to outperform players like Shaq and Tim Duncan, who are also looking for their first ring. However, with the season being shortened and more than half the league now needing inhalers, it would give Acuff the latitude he needs to dominate the league. As towards the end of the 1998 season, he would be averaging 28 points per game, as well as 6 assists, which would put him as one of the favorites for MVP, but would ultimately lose out on in the end. And with Acuff being snubbed of his first MVP, the only thing left for him to do is win an NBA championship, which is something that AI failed to do in his career. But before we get to that, he's going to need to win a playoff series, which is exactly what Acuff would do, upsetting the Magic in round 1 after a clutch shot would send them home in Game 5. But in round 2, Acuff would find himself facing off against the Pacers once again. And while he and Indiana will go at it multiple times throughout his career, the better team this time would be the Pacers, dropping off the Sixers in 4 games after a poor shooting performance from Acuff in the elimination game. But let's keep in mind that Acuff's only 23 years old and now entering his 4th season. There's still a ton of time for him to build a legendary resume. That is, if he can manage to make it past the Pacers, where entering his 3rd playoffs and for the 3rd time would be matched up against Indiana in the conference semis. But despite averaging 35 points and playing nearly every minute of every game, the Sixers would fall short once again, placing even more pressure on Acuff and completely overshadowing his level of play, leading him to publicly demand more help and for the front office to completely ignore, forcing Acuff to take over what will by far be his most important season yet.
I'm the MVP. I'm the MVP of this league. The best basketball players in the world. I was honored with the MVP.
Which is exactly the case for Acuff, as in his 5th season, he would be averaging 30 points per game, as well as shooting 40% from beyond the arc, which would be enough for him to be crowned the best player in the league, ultimately winning the 2001 MVP just like his Hall of Fame counterpart. But now, he's going to be tested in the playoffs, where in round 1, he'd be face-to-face once again with his old foe, the Pacers. And while history tends to repeat itself, the Pacers are now an older team, and Acuff is red hot with the motivation of his past failures. Because now it's Acuff's league, and he would attack the Pacers' defense like no other, averaging 42 on his way to a 4-1 series win. And now with his biggest rivals out of the way, he's on to another challenge in Toronto, where he would duel with Vince Carter, leading to an epic Game 7 that would be determined by the final seconds of the series. And it doesn't end there, as in the Eastern Conference Finals, another Game 7 would be looming over Acuff's head in Milwaukee. But despite playing with a bruised tailbone, Acuff would pull through, dropping a career-high 15 assists, clearing the path to his first ever Finals appearance.
Game 1 of the NBA Finals. The 76ers clinched the conference championship that climaxed in a Game 7 showdown. But now they need 4 more wins to reach their ultimate goal. It all starts right here, right now.
He now only has one more team to take down, that being the Kobe and Shaq-led Los Angeles Lakers, who are coming fresh off of their championship run last season. But unfortunately for them, Acuff would be a lot more than they could handle. With his elite pace and scoring, Acuff would drop 50 on 8 threes in Game 1 to steal home court and take a 1-game lead in the series. But of course, with a young superstar leading a team with no backup, there are of course going to be many mistakes and mental lapses. So while Acuff would do his best, Kobe and Shaq would average a combined 65 points a game, sweeping the next 4 games and putting an end to the Sixers' historic run. But with such dominant performances by Acuff this early into his career, it's hard to count him out of the conversation as potentially one of the best scorers of all time, and maybe even the GOAT. But before we get to that, it's time for the 2002 playoffs, where Acuff would try to recreate his legendary run from last year. But to keep it short, he'd run into Paul Pierce and the Celtics, who would make quick work of the Sixers and end their season before it started. And to add more salt to the wound, the following seasons wouldn't look much different. The Sixers would lose again in the first round to the Pistons, miss the playoffs entirely the following year, lose to the Pistons again in round 2 the next, and despite averaging a career-high 33 points and 7 assists per game, would get swept by the Heat in another round 1 exit. The media is eating him alive, and with little to no help behind him, all the blame falls to Acuff. So now, he is forced to make a decision that will hopefully change the trajectory of the rest of his career. At the start of his 11th season, Acuff would be traded to the Denver Nuggets, giving him a fresh start with a better, younger team. But most importantly, we would see the rise of one of Acuff's teammates, that being Carmelo Anthony, who's earned his right as a young star to become the best teammate that Acuff has ever played with. While previously Acuff had to be a mostly one-man show, the addition of Melo now gives Acuff a lethal sidekick. But as far as the 2006 season goes, it's not getting any easier, as we'd be transitioning from the physical play of the 90s to the fast-paced style of play we see today. Something Acuff would adapt to, but the rest of his team would not, as he would fall short once again in the first round to the Spurs, shooting only 30% from deep, and critics now calling him a parasite to winning basketball. And although he hasn't exceeded AI's career, he's definitely doing AI justice by fulfilling his potential almost perfectly and gaining the opportunity to earn a ring for both himself and Melo, which would have to be sooner than later considering the 2007 season will be the last he plays with the Nuggets. So he'll have one last chance to leave Denver with a championship. And he would give himself a really good shot, as the Nuggets would win 56 games and claim the title as the best team in the NBA. But as the playoffs roll around, standing in his way would be the Los Angeles Lakers, setting us up for an elite guard versus guard duel, because they're of course led by the league MVP Kobe Bryant, who's dominant on both sides of the ball and has a mentality unlike any other in the league. But in time, 2 ball-dominant stars, which in theory should have worked, would result in some heated sideline exchanges and lead to some big cracks in the team's chemistry, as the Nuggets would get blown out every game and get swept by the Lakers in round 1. As Acuff enters his final years in the league, he's starting to realize that he's not the player he once was, and so have the Nuggets, which ultimately means that at the 2008 trade deadline, he'll be heading to Motor City, where he'll play out the rest of the season as a member of the Detroit Pistons. So while Acuff can still keep up, he's a lot older now, and success is not guaranteed. Because by the end of the season, Acuff, who was already joining a below 500 team, wouldn't be able to propel them into a playoff spot, ending his time in Detroit on a bitter and sad note. So with his days as a superstar officially coming to its end, Acuff would be making one final stop, ending up in Memphis to join up with the Grizzlies with one last goal in mind. Because although he never won a championship, he would be the undisputed pioneer of the modern point guard. And now it's his job to pass on his knowledge and leave the game with a lasting impact, paving the way for the next generation and maybe the next Allen Iverson.